Okay, so first I'm gonna be going over a deadlift or a hinge movement. There's a lot of different ways to do a deadlift, which is great. There's a few things that go along with every single way to do it or style to do it. But for a lot of us, because we don't have barbells right now, we're doing a lot of the straight leg deadlifts, which is holding a dumbbell here or an RDL and coming out into a hinge position. So this is a hinge when you're hinging at your hips. So this is a proper form of a hinge movement. So a lot of good mornings where usually you have a weight over your shoulders and you're coming back and kind of folding over as a hinge movement. A lot of things still are like a squat. So you want that stable base with your feet. You're torquing out, even though you are not coming down into a squat, you're still torquing out. You want a neutral pelvis, even though you're folding over in half basically. I like to think of it as you're folding over a table. So if you were just to put a table right here and you're folding over it, your butt's getting pushed out behind you, and it's not a big movement here, especially if you don't have flexible hamstrings. I have terrible flexibility. So my movements aren't about going down to the ground. I stop about knee height, but my butt is pushed way out. My hips are still neutral. My lower back is not arched. I'm not like this. I'm in a neutral position. My glutes are engaged, meaning that I am squeezing them and trying to fire them the entire time. My shoulders are packed, so they are not rounding forward, therefore my back isn't rounded over. They're packed, they're strong and stable, and my head is neutral and slightly tucked, so my ears are over my shoulders. So when I come and do this, I'm sitting back into the hinge movement. So sitting back and then up. And I can feel this a lot in my hamstrings. I don't have to go way down here to feel it. I can feel it by sitting back. My glutes are engaged. In that movement, it's hard for people to still engage their glutes, and it does take practice, but you can practice by sticking your glutes out, pretending like you're laying over a table, and torque your feet. So rotate your heels in and squeeze your glutes at the same time. You're gonna feel your glutes firing. That's what you want. That's how to get them engaged throughout the movement. So if you come down and they're engaged, you're torquing your feet to help engage your glutes, and you squeeze your glutes as you come up. Holy balls, that burns. That's how you are engaging your glutes. And that deadlift movement or that hinge movement is squeezing them as you come up. It's not a fast movement. And the other thing is, I don't come all the way up into a neutral position at the top of a deadlift, because when you're at the top of a deadlift like that, your glutes and your hamstrings are no longer engaged. And especially with having no barbells and just working with dumbbells, I want to create the most tension with each lift as I can. Therefore, I'm not going to come out of the movement where I no longer have tension on it. So I'll show you a few examples of that. So all the way down as far back as you can go and coming up to about here. I still have tension on my glutes and on my hamstrings. If I come all the way up, I lose that tension. So I go down and then up to about here and then back down and do another rep. And it's slow and controlled. So it fucking burns and hurts because I'm going slow as I can, and keeping that tension on that muscle at all times. Kind of same thing with a squat. Let's just use a goblet squat. So create that strong base with your feet, toes spread out, 40% on your toes, 40% on your heels, 20% on your outer foot, torquing your feet out, pushing your knees out, engaging your glutes, having a tucked pelvis, shoulders down and back, a neutral spine, chin tucked just slightly, ears over your shoulders. It's a lot to remember. You're gonna go down into a squat, keeping that neutral pelvis, keeping those ribs pinned down and then up. You can come up and squeeze your glutes. When you come up to squeeze your glutes, you're not pressing your hips forward. That's putting you in an anterior pelvic tilt. It's not healthy on your spine. When you come up from the movement, you can squeeze your glutes right here and then go back down. But you don't want to over exaggerate that squeeze. I see a lot of people do this with deadlifts as well, especially when they're barbell deadlifting. So they have the bar, they come up and they go like this and they push their hips forward into that bar, whether you're squatting or doing a deadlift. You do not want to do that. You're creating that anterior pelvic tilt, and that's not healthy on your back, and it's not necessary. So you come down, we have a special guest named Gus, and you come up. You can still squeeze your glutes at the top of the movement without arching your back or pushing your hips forward. What was next? I have my notes down here so I don't forget. Bent over row. The bent over row is one that I see done incorrectly a lot. And it's because people aren't aware of how their body moves, kind of the same thing. So you want that neutral pelvis, your head's not tilted back. That's the other thing with deadlifts and squats. When you're doing a deadlift or a squat, your head is neutral. You're not looking up, you're not looking around, and you're not tucked way down. You want to be looking ahead, but when you come down into a squat, that doesn't mean that you're still looking up. Your eyes are down, focused down on a spot on the ground, and you're focusing on that. That's gonna keep that neutral spot in your neck and head. Don't look up. When you're doing a deadlift, don't look up at the sky. That is not a neutral spine. Can you see how much my head is arched and tilted? That's not a neutral spine. So that leads into the bent over row. Bent over row can be done with a barbell like this. Underhand grip can be done one arm at a time, and it can be done both at a time. I'm just gonna show you one arm at a time so I can still talk and do it. So, bent over row. Stable base, feet apart. You can put one foot up on a bench, that's okay too. This foot, if you only have one foot down on the ground, still needs to create a stable base. Feet, toes spread apart, pressure on your heel and your toes. You're not coming up at all. When you're bent over, you want, if you are leaning on something, you still want your shoulder to be over your hand and your ear to be somewhat aligned with your shoulder. Your ribs are still pinned, they're not flared out. If they're flared out, you're creating that anterior pelvic tilt. I know there's a lot of Instagram videos of girls doing movements and they create that anterior pelvic tilt because it helps stick their butt out more. Who gives a shit? Stop doing that. Just stop doing that. You can still have a great butt and show it off without throwing your back out. So, neutral spine, ribs pinned, core engaged, neutral pelvis, sturdy base. You're pulling with your back. This is an exercise for your back. So you're pulling and your elbow should come in line with basically your rib cage and your hips. That's the top of the movement. You're only pulling with your back muscles. It's a small movement. I see a lot of this. This is not using all your back muscles. And I know it's easy to do. If you can swing it around that easy, you need to go up and wait. And you need to slow the movement down and control it and stop where your tricep is at parallel. It's at parallel. If it goes up, you're no longer engaging all your back muscles correctly with that movement. It's small. And you control the weight on the way down. You're not bringing it up and then just like that's what I see a lot. And that's not what we want. We want it slow and controlled. Everything at neutral, parallel. That's a big one. You don't want your elbow to flare out either when you do it. So your elbow is not coming out like this. Your elbow stays close to your side as you can. Same with tricep extensions. Your tricep is parallel to the ground. It's in line with your back. You have a straight line, core is tight, ribs are pinned, pelvis is neutral, and you're going back. It's a slow and controlled movement. That one's heavy. Slow and controlled. Your elbow is not out here. You're not swinging it up. You're not using momentum to swing it up. Your elbow should not come over your back when you do that. See how my elbow comes up? You're flaring your elbow. There's no control. Even if you are working the tricep a little bit more, you can cause injury by doing that as well. Same thing with bicep curls. Your elbow stays close to your side. You can do a hammer curl where your thumb is pointed out in front of you, or regular bicep curl. But your elbow stays close to your side. Even if you do that outer bicep curls that I like to do a lot, your elbow stays close to your side. Those are all, I think, the main ones that I wanted to touch on.